Hello, I'm Chris Spackman, and this is my conference talk for supporting English learners and engaging families with Google Translate tools. This is for the ITIP conference in Sandusky, Ohio, on October 28 and 29, 2024. So this, as I said, is supporting English learners and engaging families with Google Translate, although we're going to talk about many of the Google tools. So first I start with a survey, what you'll see here, a survey here in Japanese. Okay. The idea is that this is a lot like what families see if they're not fluent in English, if they're not comfortable using English for school communications. And they get a form that looks like this to them, and they're not sure what to do, right? As the school, we want to make sure that they can communicate with us and get all the information they need from us in a language they understand. And to do that, okay, we're going to look at some of the legal reasons and requirements, right? The why are we here? What are schools required to do for the students, for the families? Okay. As you see here in today's agenda, or today's nagare, we're going to talk a little bit about the tech familiarity for participants, the legal requirements, as I mentioned, translating documents, and documents can be a lot of different things, right? Translating slides, that can be a little more difficult because it's not built in. Creating multilingual forms, luckily that just got a lot easier. Another teacher and I worked on some app script that we'll talk about to make it easier for people to translate Google Forms into another language. It's not as easy as translating a document yet, but it's a lot easier than it was without this app script. And then we'll talk a little bit about like videos and multimedia, captions, subtitles, the sort of things that you need for newcomers, and when you're sending videos home where you're like something like this, where someone's talking all in English. You'll notice I left some space at the bottom of this video for the subtitles. So that, depends on the length of the subtitle. Sometimes it goes 2 lines and overlaps a little bit. But we want to think about things like that when we're making videos or sending things home. We want to make sure we have it in languages they can understand. All right. So first, a little bit about me. I've worked in Japan for many years. So I've been doing EFL, which is English as a foreign language, or ESL, or ESOL. We'll talk about that a little bit later. English for speakers of other languages for, like almost 30 years now. Wait, is that right? Wow, okay, 30 years. I have an MA TESOL from Ohio Dominican University here in Columbus, Ohio, and I teach Monday to Friday in Columbus. I teach K to high school, actually, to college, actually, students for English for speakers of other languages for the Graham family of schools. And I also teach on weekends adult ESL, or ESOL, at Columbus State Community College. So I'm pretty good at English and Japanese, and I'm learning Spanish. I have a little bit of high school German still with me. So that's me. I've got a fair amount of experience. I've also been a Linux user since 1998 or 99, somewhere in there. So I'm fairly tech comfortable, if you will. I'm not a programmer. I build my own computers. I can write some app script. I write bash scripts, but I'm not an official IT person. Okay. Here's some places you can contact me. I check all of these emails many times a day. The Charles School one that's my Graham Family of Schools email. That's my work email. osugisakai@gmail. That's what I use for sharing documents, doing things collaboratively. ChrisSpackman.com is more for my personal, my professional stuff that I share with people. And I'm on Mastodon. I have a LinkedIn account, but mostly I'm just on Mastodon for social media. So, and here's a QR code. This will be live by the time you see this. It will have all the links for today and some explanations and materials from today. Okay, so for example, this is where you'll be able to find these slides. All right. So next we're going to talk about why. Why are we here? What are we going to learn about? Our goals for today are understand the legal requirements for language access, look at some Google tools to support English learners, and look at some Google tools for multilingual family engagement. Now, to be honest, most of these Google tools are the same thing, the same tools. But before we get into it, let's look at some of the vocabulary about ESL, ESOL, and English learners. So first, English as a second language, ESL. This is outdated because many students and families, English is not the second language. It might be the third language, the fourth, or whatever, right? So we're trying to get away from the idea of the second language. So, but now the field, TESOL, is teacher of or teaching English to speakers of other languages, because that's the broadest, the best way to describe it. English for speakers of other languages, which is ESOL, right? And then you sometimes see EAL or ENL, which is English as an additional language or English as a new language. Both of those are just ways to try to say it without counting the languages, without saying it's a second or it's a third, right? I prefer ESOL in the K-12 context, but again, many families are used to ESL or English as a second language, so they don't, they might not understand ESOL, but if you say ESL, they're like, oh, okay, that, yeah. All right? Now, students, the learners, the current most popular term is English learner, or EL, right? ELL, English language learner, is older, and it's you hear it sometimes still, but it's out of date now. EMEB is my personal favorite because the emergent part shows that they're still learning, that for the educational environment, they're a learner. They're not bilingual yet. They're not multilingual yet. And so they are receiving services. All right. Whereas MLL, or English learner, MLL, multilingual learner, are they receiving services? Are they not? Did they place out? Are they multilingual? You're not sure. But you do see that. That's actually becoming more popular. And sometimes it's just ML for multilingual learner without the lingual part being a letter. LEP is old, but that's what's used in laws, in like actually on the books. And so you see it a lot in government documents and things like that. But it's just no one uses it in speech anymore unless you're specifically talking about what the law says. But it's the same thing as what today we would call an English learner or an EMEB student. Okay? And then L1 we use to describe the student's first or preferred language. We say that's their L1. Now I say preferred language because some students, and I've had students like this where they maybe grew up speaking like an indigenous language, and then they went to school and they learned like Spanish or French in school. That's what they used, or even English sometimes, right? So they may prefer in the academic environment, they may prefer English or French or Spanish, even though that's not their first language. But it's the one they're used to doing school in, and they may not even be able to read in their actual true first language. So, but it doesn't matter. L1 is just a way of saying the language that the student is more comfortable in, either for speaking or for reading and writing, right? Like I said, I prefer EMAB just in general for students, okay? Next up, we're going to talk about the legal requirements, right? When are we needing to translate? So the Department of Justice and Department of Education are very specific. This is in the laws, right? Schools must communicate information to limited English proficient, there's that LEP, right? Parents in a language they can understand about any program, service, or activity that is called to the attention of parents who are proficient in English. So anything you're sending home to a big group of families, whether it's the class, like teachers sending a syllabus home, or the school sending an announcement about a dance or something, if you have families that prefer Spanish or prefer Somali, you need to make that announcement available to them in that language. You can't just send the English and be like, well, they'll figure it out. Or, oh, the student can explain to them. No, technically that's not legal. Some schools will just translate the text, and they'll send like a nice flyer with all sorts of colorful and nice fonts and images in English, and then they'll just send like the text in Spanish or whatever. That's technically legal, but it definitely isn't creating an environment that says we welcome you, we want you here. That's like, oh, you're an afterthought. Oh, we can't be bothered to translate the document into Spanish for you. We're just going to copy and paste it, and So, sorry, that's a little pet peeve of mine. But so these are legal requirements. We have to do this. Okay? So here's some information about when, like the specifics from the laws about when, right? Enrollment, parent permission, gifted and talented programs. You can be a language learner, an English learner, and still be gifted and talented and be in those programs. Just because you can't do the math or the math worksheet, the math in English, or the history test in English doesn't mean you can't be in that program, right? Also handbooks, report cards, right? All this stuff. This needs to be available to the families in a language they prefer, right? So now, at my school, we have a little bit separate. The English learner stuff, or the families that the mainstream families that maybe, the parents prefer a different language, I worry about that. I take care of that. We have a service for that. I make sure people are translating things. The IS, right, for students who have IEPs, they have a different service. They have different funds. They bring in outside, live interpreters for IEP meetings. I think that's a good way to do it, because you don't need an expensive live interpreter or professional translator for a permission slip for a field trip. You do need it for an IEP, right? And you make sure you have it for an IEP, because if the lawyers get involved, you will wish you had spent the money on the interpreter, right, and the translator. Okay. Here's how we find these families. They complete something called a language usage survey when they register for the school. Some schools, it's every year. Some schools, it's just when they first join the school. I think every year is better, just because sometimes students' situations change. But this form asks about the languages used at home, the student's first language, where the student was born, the preferred school communication languages. Ideally, you are getting this you're getting this for the spoken language and the written language. Some families are okay, like with a phone call in English, but they want the document in Spanish, for example, right? Or whatever the L1 is. In the past, the state forms have not been separated out, but really you want to get the spoken and the written separately, that their preferences separately. Because if the teacher can just call home in English, then great. You don't need to worry about an interpreter for that. And you can use Google Docs to translate the documents going home, right? So it may save you some time and money by splitting those out. But this language usage survey is how somebody recognizes, okay, this family coming in, the student is maybe an English learner, maybe not. That's either the registrar or the ESOL coordinator, right, decides that, figures that out. But then somebody also figures out the languages that the families want and hopefully communicates it to the school staff. I've heard horror stories of teachers, classroom teachers, who no one warns, oh, you have a newcomer who doesn't know any English starting in your class. And they go to class on Thursday morning and, oh, Maria's here and Maria doesn't know any English and I didn't know she was coming. That's a huge fail. Somewhere along the line, there has to be a process. My schools are small enough, I take care of that. But there has to be a process for that so that the classroom teachers, because it is a lot of work, and they have to be translating things, right? And so if your school doesn't have a system or just it isn't clear who does this, make sure you figure it out. Okay? Next up, we're going to start talking about the actual basic Google tools for translating documents. So here are some of the basic tools we're going to talk about. Google Translate, Google Docs, Google Sheets, Google Slides, Google Forms, and Google Drawings. Even though Google Drawings for some reason does not have its own homepage. We'll talk about these. Now Google Translate, I'm guessing many people have used that already. On the actual Google Translate homepage, you can go to, well, let me pull it up here. Forgot to prepare that one actually. You can see how often I pull this up. So you've got text, images, documents, and websites. The very common one is just to type in English here. Hello, how are you today? Right, and then it comes up in the language you want. You can, choose other languages here. Right, I use Spanish a lot at school. This is both a good way to translate if you just have, like, if you're sending a message home through like some service or through a Google Voice, text message or something. You say, I wanted to let you know there is no school tomorrow, right? That's actually something I do for all my students just to make sure when there's a snow day or we got canceled for some reason. I always G-chat all of my students in English and their language to make sure they're aware, right? Because they're not all watching the morning news, right? They're not all checking their email. Text is an easy way to chat with students during class, especially if you don't want to be talking and using the phone version where you can with the phone you can just talk into it and it'll translate and say it back to the person. You can use that with this here.
Quería avisarte que mañana no hay clases.
Right, but I find in class if I'm doing this, I'm just typing and letting them read. But it's also great just for like small things, right? Images. If you need to translate an image, this is very helpful. I'm not sure exactly when they added this, but it's super helpful, especially because we have a lot of third-party outside groups that work with our students, and they often have flyers, and they just give us a PDF file that's in, or a PNG file that's in English, and they don't have a Spanish version because they never thought about it. So with this, you just drop your graphic here, and it's going to translate it for me. Look at that. It replaced the text, and it actually came out pretty good. This si se puede, that's actually because it was in Spanish originally, so it didn't translate it. But, it's not super beautiful here. There's some issues with this. But for 20 seconds of work, I used to spend hours translating some of these. But now with Image Translate, it's super helpful. Documents, we'll look at this again later because you see the file types here. I actually think that's fewer than it was a few years ago, but PDF is helpful. DocX is not bad, but we'll look at Google Drive where you can do it in Google Docs a lot more easily. But the PPTX, the PowerPoint slides, that's often the easiest way to translate slides is to use this, okay? And then websites, this is very helpful when you need to share an external website that you don't control with families, right? So for example, and just as an example, as CNN.com, right? So what happens is it pops it up and you see it's like a wrapper around CNN here. And so you just share this link with the families and then they'll see this. Okay? So that's very helpful. And it popped up in a new window, obviously. So you still have this here. Okay? So that's the Google Translate website. Now the app also has, right? The app also has, like I said, you can do conversations, right? You can hold the camera up to a document and translate it just like we did with that image. Just in real time, right? Hold it up. I've had students do that where they hold it up at the board when the teacher's only putting English up on the board for notes. Please don't do that, right? If you've got a newcomer, like give them the notes in Spanish or whatever language they need, right? But the phone app is also very, very helpful and can do a lot. The next thing we're going to look at here, we've talked about all this, right? But, oh yeah, students get to choose what they do. Not all students, even newcomers, want you to give them the notes translated. Maybe they want to do it themselves. Maybe because they want the control, they want to zoom in on what they know and don't know, right? And also sometimes a school might have a no phone policy, but for some things, like if they have a Chromebook or a computer, they should use that, right? They should use Google Translate on there. But sometimes the phone is easier. So there should be a policy about, when an English learner can pull out a phone and use it for Google Translate or something like that, when maybe a regular student, a mainstream student, wouldn't be allowed to. Okay? Only Google Docs currently has Translate built in. Okay? So this is the most dangerous game. I just put a few paragraphs of it here. This is easy. I'm guessing many people have done this already. You just go to Tools, Translate Document, choose the language, and you can type in, right? And it'll jump to it. And then Translate. What I like to do is change the name. I don't want this translated copy of. I want to go to, and I put the language of the translation. So I put Espanol, right? Depending on the school that I'm at and how familiar teachers are with it and how much I'm sharing it with those teachers, I might put like Spanish. If I think like they're going to be confused by ES or ESP, right? I might just put Spanish. So I like to do that, and when I know I'm making a document that I know will be translated, I will put English here too. I'll make the original say English, right? Now this one's going to be translated to Spanish, so I'll do Español. And then Translate, it pops up in a new window. So your original is still here, no problem. Now you've got the translation. Okay, we don't need that. Right? I like to check these. Like this pregunto, that's just a capitalization thing. Want a space there. Now, llamaban, I don't know Spanish well enough to know which one of these is correct. I'm going to trust Google. Okay, maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe Google's wrong, but personally I just feel like the spell check knows it probably better than I do. Obviously, if you know Spanish or you know the target language, you can check yourself. But that's it. I mean, now one thing to be aware of is if you upload a docx file, you won't have the translate option. And it'll say up here, it'll say docx, right? You need to go to file. Here it doesn't have it. It just has make a copy and all. But if it's a docx file, it'll have, save as Google Doc. Right? And you want to convert it to a Google Doc, then you can translate it. Okay? But Translate's pretty straightforward. It's the only one that's built in, and it's super, super easy to use. Okay? Like I said, you've got the info there. Next up is Sheets. And I've not had a huge need for this. Most of the time, students aren't doing a whole lot of like English sentences or paragraphs or, things like that in Sheets. But there is a cool, useful feature, the Translate feature. So as you can see on the screen there, we have one spreadsheet that has the English word, the Arabic word, the Spanish, Somali, Nepali, Japanese, where each one of those languages is translated automatically based on what you put in the English. I've also made ones where you have the English word, the English definition, and then these are more individual for students. And so I have like a French-speaking student, English word, English definition, French word, French definition, and all of it is filled in automatically. After I put in the English word and the English definition, the French is filled in automatically. And I can make a copy of it and easily switch it over to do it for a Spanish student. I often make these where it has a tab for each class, so the student can put in their own, like when they get the vocab from the teacher, they can put it in themselves and immediately see it in Spanish if that's what they need. It depends, again, on the teacher and on the student, especially if they want to actually make use of that. But it is there if you need it or if the student wants it. So here's some information about the actual formula that you use. And I like to put in an if statement just to make sure that, well, not make sure, but just so it's blank if there's no English word. That way you can pre-fill like 100 words and the student doesn't see a bunch of, error messages or something. They just see a nice blank space if there's no word there yet. And as soon as you type in an English word, then it fills in. Okay? But the actual formula is Google Translate, parentheses, quote, content, comma, quote, English, because that's what you're translating from, and then comma, quotes to the L1, right? As you can see there. That's it for Sheets, really. Next is Google Slides. There are two ways to do this. Well, basically. The first way is to just download your Google Slides as a PowerPoint. Right? So you would just go to File, Download, Microsoft PowerPoint, right? And then upload it to Google Translate web page, right, that we looked at. Go to Documents and then upload here, and then download the translated slides. Then you have to upload them to Google Drive again and convert them to Google Slide format. That's one way. If you're planning ahead, if you're working before you need the slides, like if you're making them new, there's a translate slides. If you go to Tools Extensions, App Script, you can paste in this content that creates an extension to translate the slides. Okay? And what it does is when you run it, translate slides, translate slides, open translate, it pops up over here, and you can change this list, but you choose what to translate it into. For example, Japanese here, translate. So here we didn't select anything. I hoped it would do this entire slide. Let's try that again. Yep, there it goes. You actually have to click it first. Now notice it replaces the element. So if you want to keep both, which I recommend, if you just have a couple of Spanish speakers in your classroom and that's it, you don't have like 5 different languages, just duplicate this element, right? Control D, duplicate, move it down here, translate this one. Now you've got both, you've got a multilingual slide, everyone in class can get the content. This is not easy to do if you have existing slides. You would basically have to add in the translate slide, they call it Google script, and then the sidebar HTML, right? This is where you would change the languages. Okay, and then you have to deploy it and add it and everything, and it's not super easy to use, but once you have it in one set of slides, use that as a template. Every time you need a new one, just go to, make a copy, entire presentation, right? And it says it's going to copy it over. That's the other way. There are those two ways. The translation script or the Google Slides, like I have here, the download, go to Google Translate, download, upload, convert back to Google Slides, right? That's a little bit, it's not annoying, but it takes once you get used to it, it takes 30 seconds, a minute maybe. But it does do the whole thing easily and neatly. If you've got students you need 3 or 4 different languages, this is probably going to be the way you want to go. But note that files larger than 10 megabytes are not going to be translated. You might need to go in and remove some of the pictures. I've done this where I remove the pictures, translate, and then put the pictures back in. People like to put in, 25 pictures that are all 5 megabytes each, and wow, it's suddenly a 100 megabyte file. Google Translate doesn't want that. Now, as it mentioned here, there are external websites and extensions. I don't like using external extensions because if they're from a third party. I just don't know the privacy. I don't know what's going to happen. And now maybe people who know Google better than me can tell me how much lockdown there is, because the permissions say they can access all of the slides in your Google Drive, right? Or all of the files in your Google Drive. And if they get hacked or if they get, compromised and someone gets in, slides less so, but there are some student privacy issues even with slides. I've got slides on my Google Drive at school that have students' IEP information or 504 information. And if some external, slide translation, company gets compromised and bad guys get in and take all of my slides, we've just released student, protected private information to the world. Now again, that's maybe a little far-fetched. I'm not an expert on what exactly the permissions are for, external, add-ons. connecting to my Google Drive, but I'd rather err on the side of caution, which is why I prefer things like the translation script, and why I prefer the add-on or the app script that we're going to talk about next for Google Forms. Okay, so next up is Google Forms. As I was saying, I prefer app script for this. There are maybe some external add-ons that will do it, but until recently, if you weren't using an add-on, the only choice really was to copy into Google Translate, paste into Google Translate, and then paste the new language back in. Now there are some issues with data collection that we need to talk about, but just recently another educator and I were working with Gemini and ChatGPT to create an app script that will automatically translate your form. It gets 90-something% of it. There's a few things like the labels on a scale that it won't translate just because there's no way for the script to actually change that. But this is the way I'd recommend right now. If you need a form translated and you just want it in one language, right? You've got the English, you need it in Spanish, use this Translate Google Forms. I put it as JavaScript here, but I guess technically it would be GS, Google Script or whatever. But this code, you'll do the same thing as we did on the slides, where you'll paste it into, right? You would go to the script editor, and as soon as it loads, you would paste it in here, and then save it and run it. And then it will translate the translate the form into a new language. Okay? The other ways that you can do it, and the reasons for doing this are data collection. So here's a multilingual form with 2 languages per question where I've just got the English and the Japanese. English, Japanese, English. The reason is I want all of it in one, collected in one place. Okay? I don't want it to be in different form, different spreadsheets, one for each language, right? This one is a multilingual form. Let me pull up the preview, where you choose your language first. The questions are still separate. The answers are still in separate columns, but they're all in the same spreadsheet. Okay, so here I prefer Nihongo. So next, and then I get the questions in Japanese. Now this is going to go, right? This is going to go into different, right? So here's the English answers, here's the Japanese answers, right? So again, your data collection is a little bit more difficult. It's the same thing if you're using a multilingual form where, like with that translation, with like this, where you've got an English form and a Spanish form and a French form and a Japanese form, right? You might have to do some collating if you want to put all that into one results sheet, right? But these are your options. Depending on how many languages you need and what you need to do with the data, some might be better than others, right? It's easier to translate it now, but what you need to do with the data is what's going to determine, like, maybe which one is best for you. Okay, now I do have a YouTube video. This is older, it's about a year ago, so it doesn't have the app script thing yet, but it does go in more detail about the different types of forms and how to translate it and some shortcuts. Next up is Google Drawings, and basically I would say avoid it. Don't put text into an image. Now we did look at Google Translate and the image, translate, right, with images here, but you can see it's not as nice, right? There's some weirdness to it. So in general, avoid putting text in images. It's also an accessibility issue. If you have students or families that have, impaired vision, right? They might be using a screen reader to read the email to them, right? And if all of your text is in the image, the screen reader can't read that. Okay? Now Google Drive can sometimes do OCR. if all you have is an image or a PDF or something and you upload it, it can try to take it out of there. The better option is to try to find an original. Ask somebody, can you send me the whatever you used to make it so I can edit it? Okay? But yeah, if you're sending out newsletters, even if that newsletter service has an auto-translate, again, it's not translating the images. So actually what my school does is they have each image that has text is in there once in English, once in Spanish, if we need to, once in French or in Somali or Arabic or whatever, for whatever the school needs. But that means you're putting in 4 images instead of 1, right? Because people want to put the text in the image. Better just avoid it, okay? All right, that's the end of the basic tools. Next, we're going to get a bit more into the more advanced tools like Google Gemini or Google NotebookLM. But we're also going to get into YouTube and captions and transcripts that are also very helpful. Okay, so that's coming up next, advanced tools. So in advanced tools, we're going to talk about Google Meet, Google Gemini, Google NotebookLM, and then YouTube. All right. Now, Google Meet is probably the one that might be most helpful for not dealing with, but for like meeting with families or when you need to interpret for a family. Because Google Meet has live captions. This is very cool. I'm not sure if it's something that the person who creates the Meet has to turn on, but I know that each user can turn on translated captions. So once live captions are on, the user can say, hey, I need this in Japanese or I need this in Spanish, and it will translate it. Whereas the other people may just be seeing it in English, or they maybe have it turned off because they don't need it, right? The problem is, of course, you need to make sure parents are aware of this and know how to do it. It may be useful to spend some time teaching the students how to do it, and maybe even make a video to send home for the parents to see, maybe see their students doing it. And then if you have a meeting in Google Meet, they will know how to turn it on. Okay? So those are very helpful. I'm not a huge fan of virtual meetings, but with Google Meet and the translated captions, it's very helpful. Of course, be aware the captions are often wrong. Not because the translation's wrong, but because just the speech recognition is not always accurate. Google Gemini is an LLM, a large language model. It's like ChatGPT, right? It's great for creating text or translating text or getting a summary of a text or like anything that you need to do with students in the classroom involving like a worksheet or a reading or anything like that, a quiz, right? You can do with this. Now, if your school has something like Magic School AI or something, they're either using this or they're using ChatGPT or one of the others in the back end, right? And they're just giving you a easier to use front end. So, but if you've got Google Gemini and you can just go there and do it anyways without having to be paying for another subscription or something, you can do almost anything. A big thing that I'm a fan of right now is translating subtitles, because I can get the English captions, right, the English subtitles, including the timings, easy enough. But I need it in Spanish or I need it in Japanese. And so using Gemini to translate is very helpful. But of course, like it says there, check the facts. You want to make sure it's getting things correct. It's not hallucinating things. Also, my feeling is just have a conversation. I don't start out by saying, okay, you are an ESL expert with 40 years of experience and you prefer this style of teaching. I don't necessarily do that. I just say, hey, here's my situation, here's what I need, help me, right? Give me this. And then I have a conversation. Oh, okay, I like that second idea. Can we expand on that? Can we add a little more? It's super helpful. It can help you get a reading, a worksheet, some questions, a quiz, an exit ticket very quickly. And you can get it at different levels. But probably everyone's familiar with what these can do. If you've seen something like Magic School AI or one of those sites, they're using Google Gemini or they're using ChatGPT or Claude or one of those in the background. So this is just more directly, talking straight to the large language model that's doing it anyways. Next is Google NotebookLM. I have very little experience with this. It's fairly new in like educational consciousness, I think. Like people weren't using this a year ago the way they were using Gemini or ChatGPT. But my understanding is this is going to be very helpful if you've got the school textbooks or you've got the school handbook, all the school forms, and you can upload them into it and then query it, where it's much less likely, it's not going to hallucinate because it's only drawing from those materials. YouTube is great for many things, but especially for finding videos for newcomers. There's so much content out there and much of it is not in English. So we can find content area videos in the student's L1. Go to Google Translate, put in your search, right? The high school algebra solving two-step equations. Take the Spanish, go back to YouTube and search. You'll get plenty of results. Look through a few of them, just check them real quick. And then if you need to, pull up the transcript, you can always turn on the auto-translated captions and look at the English. But they can watch a video from a Mexican teacher talking about the same content. Great. Transcripts, right? If some of them don't have the subtitles, although the auto-captioning, the auto-translate is getting very good. And there's oftentimes you can just turn that on. But sometimes you might need to, like if it's only got English and you need the student, the student only knows Japanese, copy out the transcript, put it in a Google Doc, maybe fix it up a bit, but then translate it, give them that. It's a lot better than nothing. But of course you don't have timing information in there and all, so that's a drawback, but still, the student watching the video, or better yet, reading through, say, the Japanese first, then watching the video, and like going to the Japanese when they need to, we do want the students to learn English. Even if it's history class or math class or whatever, they still need to learn English. So if they've read through the transcript in their language, maybe they've looked through it in English, then they're watching the video, that's going to be a good learning opportunity for the English. You can add subtitles if you create them. Like I talked about using, Google Gemini or, one of those things to create subtitles, right? To translate the subtitles. Then you can use YouTube, like studio.youtube.com, to add them. Okay, and I've got the info there on how to do it, subtitles, add translation, right? So here are some do's and don'ts for sending documents home. Or first off, I always include the English also. The L1 is good. The L1's probably what they're going to be looking at, but you want to have the English for them to fall back on. And a lot of the families, it's not a 0 or 1 sort of thing, right? Some of the families, they can read, or well, many of the families, they can read English a little bit, but they don't want to wade through the entire document in English. So they're going to look through the Spanish or the Japanese or whatever, and if there's some weirdness, they can go find the English and try to make sense of that. Consider plain language or simple English, right? The plain language is like a government, mandate is not the right word, but like rules for how they're supposed to write websites and documents and things so that it's easily understandable. There's a link there to plain language information. Simple English, that's simple Wikipedia. But in general, it's just keep it simple. Avoid passive voice. Avoid idioms and phrasal verbs and things that, if you don't know English and you're going word by word, it may not make sense. Because that will also generally give you a better translation. Or, you're more likely to get a better translation if there's not a whole lot of confusing language and lots of, compound, complex sentences, right? And like I said, if the family needs to drop down to the English, having it simpler is going to be a lot easier for them to deal with. Always, always, always turn on subtitles or captions when showing videos in class. If you only have English, or even if you only have English speakers, probably there's 1 or 2 students who are going to appreciate being able to see what they're listening to. Don't use your world language teachers as interpreters or translators. Translation and interpretation are separate skills. They're not the same as being a teacher. Don't translate everything for newcomer students. I know it's a very frustrating sort of thing because it's like, translate for them, but don't translate for them. But we need them to learn English. If they're getting everything every day all in Spanish, they're losing time for learning English. So that's why we need to be thoughtful about how we do it. Pre-teach the English vocab, give them simplified English readings, but also make sure they can access the full content. You know, is this something they can deal with without having the L1? Then, you know, or is it, oh, geez, we need to get through this. They need to understand this in 10 minutes and no extra time, right? Then just give it to them in Spanish and let them get through it. The point is just be thinking always about what is your language goal, what is your content goal, how can we teach them English but also make the content accessible to them. I know that one's kind of frustrating, but it depends on the student, it depends on the situation, but just be aware of it, okay? I hope this is helpful to you. I'm always happy to get emails and talk with other professionals about how we can support our students and our families. So please don't be shy about reaching out. I include in the slides all of the links for everything because if you just have a printout or something, okay, well, where does that go to, right? So I put them all at the end in alphabetical order. So they're all here. And then copyright by me, right? Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike 4.0 International License. All that means is that you're free to use these and modify them and share them with people. But you have to have the same license, the Creative Commons Attribution License. So you can go to chrisbackman.com for the resources for this, including the editable files, the text files, where you can then modify it and turn it into something new and then turn it into a PDF or whatever you want. So thank you. I hope this was helpful for you today.